The wind moved slow across the red plain and carried dust like old memories across the land. A lone rancher rode his horse along a dry trail, where grass barely lived. He had lived alone for many seasons since loss, had hollowed his heart. His ranch sat far from towns and law, and he trusted silence more than people. As the sun leaned low, he heard a sound that did not belong to land, a cry soft but sharp like pain carried by fear. He pulled the reins and listened again. The cry came once more, and it pulled at something he thought was long buried. He guided his horse toward a rocky bend where shadows stretched like long fingers. There he saw her, an Apache girl bound to a broken poster, clothes torn by thorns, and struggled. Her eyes burned with both fear and pride. She did not beg at first. She watched him closely, measuring his soul, like a hunter measures the wind. The rancher dismounted slowly and raised his hands to show peace. He spoke gently, saying he meant no harm. He had seen cruelty before, and it lived heavy in his chest. The girl tightened against the ropes, and pain crossed her face. She whispered words filled with shame and strength, saying, "It is torn. Please take it off," meaning the rope that cut her skin and dignity. He stepped closer and saw marks of hardship on her wrists and feet. He remembered his own chains, not of rope, but of grief. He cut the bindings carefully, and she fell to her knees, catching breath. She did not cry. Instead, she straightened and stood tall, even in weakness. From the hills came distant voices, riders searching for something lost or stolen. The rancher knew danger was near. He offered his coat, and she hesitated, then accepted, wrapping herself in borrowed safety. Together they moved toward his horse, but the girl stopped and pointed toward the hills. She signed that others would come and blood would follow. The rancher chose in that moment to stand against fate. He lifted her onto the horse and mounted behind. They rode hard as the sun fell and night crept across the sky. Wolves howled far away, and the land watched silently. At the ranch, he guided her inside the small cabin where fire still lived in embers. He offered water and food. She ate slowly, eyes always alert. He spoke of the land and storms and loss. She listened and shared her name in a soft voice, and told of capture and escape and a hope that refused to die. When the night grew deep, the voices of riders passed far away like ghosts searching for what they could never own. The rancher stood guard until dawn, with rifle in hand and heart awake. As light returned, the girl stepped outside and breathed the air of freedom. She looked at the rancher and placed her hand over her heart. In that gesture, he felt a new purpose rising like the sun over plains. This was not the end of danger, but the beginning of a path where courage would be tested and wounds would seek healing. The land had brought them together, and the land would demand truth and sacrifice in return. Morning came slow and pale across the ranch. The girl stood near the fence, watching the horizon, like she expected the past to rise and chase her again. The rancher noticed how she never turned her back to open land, how her hands stayed ready even while resting. He understood that kind of waiting fear that never sleeps. He brought her warm water and clean cloth and showed her the small shed where she could rest safely. She hesitated, then stepped inside, keeping her eyes on every corner. The smell of hay and would wrap around her like a strange comfort. She sat and finally allowed her shoulders to drop. The rancher spoke softly, telling her she was safe here, at least for now. He did not ask questions because he knew pain speaks. When ready, she watched him closely, judging every word and movement. Then she told him about the men who captured her, traders and hunters who saw people as profit. She spoke of escape, of running through thorns, of falling again and again until her clothes and skin tore and her strength nearly vanished. When she said, "It is torn, please take it off," her voice shook not from weakness, but from memory. The rancher felt anger rise, but he held it down. He promised her no one would harm her here. He did not promise forever, only what he could give honestly. Later that day, dust appeared on the far trail. The girl saw it first, and her body tense. She warned, and with her eyes the rancher climbed the ridge with a spyglass and saw 3 riders moving slow, searching. They wore rough coats and carried rifles. He knew trouble had a way of finding lonely places. He told the girl to stay hidden and prepared his horse and rifle. He did not want blood, but he would not give her back. He remembered a time when no one stood for him, when the world took everything and left him breathing. He would not let that happen again. The riders reached the edge of his land and called out, asking if he'd seen a girl. The rancher answered calm and firm, saying no one had passed. The men did not believe him. They rode closer, eyes sharp and hungry. The air felt heavy like before a storm. One rider dismounted and stepped forward, accusing the rancher of lying. The rancher stood his ground, saying this was his land, and they were not welcome. The tension stretched until even the horses grew restless. From the shed came a sound, not fear, but resolve. The girl stepped out, standing tall, wrapped in the rancher's coat. She lifted her chin and faced the men. Her presence struck them silent. They had not expected strength, They saw not a victim, but a warrior wounded yet unbroken. The men cursed and reached for weapons. A rancher moved first, firing a warning shot into the dirt. He shouted that they would leave now or face consequences. The girl picked up a fallen stick, like a spear, and stood beside him. In that moment, the riders understood this was not an easy, taken-away risk against reward, and chose fear. They mounted and rode away, throwing threats into the wind. When silence returned, the girl exhaled slowly. The rancher lowered his rifle and felt the shaking in his hands. He looked at her and nodded with respect. She nodded back, equal to equal. That night, they shared food by the fire. She asked why he helped her. He answered that once someone helped him, and it saved his soul, even if they never knew it. He said the land teaches us to protect what finds us. The girl stared into the flames and said her people believe paths cross for a reason. She said maybe this crossing was meant to heal both of them. Outside, the stars watched as two broken stories began to stitch together, not without pain, but with purpose. The danger had not ended, but trust had taken its first breath. The days that followed carried a strange calm, like the land was holding its breath. The girl stayed at the ranch, moving carefully, learning the rhythms of the place. She helped with small tasks, feeding the horse, carrying water, gathering what each movement showed strength shaped by hardship, not ease. The rancher watched her from a distance, respecting space. He noticed how she flinched at sudden sounds and how she touched the knife at her belt for comfort. He taught her how to ride the land trails, and where the water stayed sweet even in dry months. She listened closely, storing knowledge like a gift. One afternoon, as clouds gathered heavy and dark, she finally spoke of her people. She described the mountains where she was born, the songs sung at night, and the lessons of endurance taught by elders. She spoke of honor, and the scars worn without shame. When she finished, the rancher felt the weight of what had been stolen from her and what still lived strong inside. Rain came hard and sudden, forcing them into the cabin. Thunder rolled across the sky, and the fire flickered. The girl stiffened at each crash, memories rising like ghosts. She whispered again, "It is torn, please take it off," not about rope or cloth, but about the fear wrapped tight around her chest. The rancher understood then that some wounds cannot be cut away with a knife. He spoke, gently telling her fear loosens. When trust grows, he told her his past, a family lost, the sickness of a town that turned away. When he needed help, he said loneliness had torn him too. As the storm passed, she breathed easier, and the walls between them thinned that night. She slept by the fire, and for the first time did not wake in terror. The rancher sat nearby, keeping watch not as a guard, but as a promise. At dawn, tracks appeared near the creek, fresh boot marks and horse prints circled the land. The girl saw them, and knew the hunters had returned with more men. The rancher studied the signs, and realized this would not end by hiding. He spoke of a trading post 2 days' ride away, where law held stronger and allies could be found. The girl hesitated, knowing the journey would expose them. She said running had taken much from her already, but stay meant capture or worse. They prepared quickly, taking only what they needed. The rancher saddled 2 horses and loaded supplies. The girl tied her hair back and steadied her breath. She placed a small charm at the cabin door, honoring the shelter that had kept her alive. They rode out under a pale sky, moving through narrow paths to avoid open ground. Every sound carried danger. Every shadow felt alive. The rancher rode ahead, scanning the land. The girl followed, eyes sharp, spirit ready. By midday, they heard shots echo from behind. Dust rose where riders pushed hard. The hunters were close. The rancher urged the horses faster, but the land turned rough rocks and gullies, slowing escape. An arrow flew past, striking dirt. The girl reacted instantly, guiding her horse. With skill born of survival, she shouted a warning, and they veered into a wooded ravine. Bullets cracked against stone and bark. At the ravine edge, the rancher saw no way through, only a steep descent and a river below. He made a choice. He told the girl to trust him completely. She did not hesitate. She nodded once. They rode down hard, sliding and crashing until the river swallowed the sound. They crossed against the current and emerged soaked, but unseen. The hunters lost the trail of the water, and their angry shouts faded. On the far bank, they rested, shaking and alive. The girl laughed softly, a sound of relief and defiance. She looked at the rancher with gratitude deeper than words. She said her people taught that courage is not the absence of fear, but moving with it. He answered that he'd been afraid every day since he lost everything, but today fear had finally loosened its grip. As night fell, they continued toward the trading post, carrying hope fragile, but real, stitched together by trust earned in fire and flight. The journey stretched long and heavy across open land. The river behind them felt like a line between the past and what might come next. The girl rode with steady focus, though exhaustion lived in her bones. The rancher kept watch, scanning every ridge, knowing pursuit could return at any moment. They traveled mostly in silence, letting the land speak. Wind bent the grass and birds rose and felt like signs of warning. And blessing at times, a girl touched the torn edge of her memory and whispered as torn, "Please take it off," meaning the weight of running that still clung to her spirit. By the second night, they reached a shallow canyon where firelight would not travel far. They rested there, sharing dried meat, and Water the rancher showed her how to read the stars for direction. She smiled faintly and shared how her people read the earth. Instead, together their knowledge wove a safer path. Near dawn, hoofbeats echoed above the canyon. The hunters had found them again. This time, more voices, more horses. The rancher counted at least 6. He knew escape alone would not save them now. He told the girl they would make a stand, but only if she trusted him fully. She looked at him long, and then nodded, placing her fate. In shared resolve, they set traps using loose stones and narrow paths, turning the canyon into a test of patience. When the riders descended, chaos followed. Horses slipped, men shouted, and curses filled the air. The rancher fired only when needed, driving fear more than death. The girl moved like shadow, using speed, and the land striking and vanishing again. One man fell and others hesitated, seeing resistance where they expected surrender. Anger burned in their eyes, but doubt crept, and they had not counted on unity. At last, the sound of another approach broke the fight. Riders wearing town colors appeared from the far end, drawn by gunfire, and troubled. The hunters realized law had arrived and fled into the hills, leaving threats behind. The town riders dismounted and questioned, and the rancher spoke true, steady, and clear. The girl stood proud and unafraid. The riders offered escort to the trading post where safety waited stronger than before. When they arrived, the girl saw people, markets, and noise of world. She had been torn from the rancher, stayed close, knowing crowds could frighten more than isolation. At the post, leaders listened to her story, and anger rose at the cruelty she faced. Protection was promised, and words sent to her people. The girl felt something loosen inside, like a knot finally giving way. That night, she stood on the porch looking out at lantern light and said quietly, "It is torn, please take it off." And then she smiled because for the first time the tearing had stopped. The rancher felt his own burden lift. He realized helping her had stitched parts of himself back together. He did not know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew he would not walk away from this path. The land had tested them with fear and fire, and now offered a breath of peace, not the end of struggle, but the beginning of healing shared and earned. Morning at the trading post arrived with voices and movement. The girl woke before sunrise and listened to life around her. Wagons creaked, people laughed, children ran free. These sounds felt strange yet comforting, like a song remembered from far away. The rancher watched her take it, and knowing safety was still new and fragile. Word spread quickly about the hunters and their crimes. Town guards rode out to track them, while messengers prepared to guide the girl back toward her people. The idea of returning stirred both hope and fear in her chest. She had survived so much that trusting peace felt harder than surviving danger. She walked with the rancher through the edge of town where the land opened again. She asked what he would do after this. He paused and said his ranch still waited, lonely, but changed by her presence. He said he did not regret choosing her path over his old silence. The girl told him her people believed debts of courage must be honored. She said his stand had saved not just her life, but her spirit. She offered him a small woven band from her wrist, a symbol of protection and remembrance he accepted with quiet respect. That afternoon, a group of elders from nearby tribes arrived, drawn by the message sent earlier. They greeted the girl with warmth and tears, seeing strength where they feared lost. The girl stood among them taller, now no longer bound by shame. The elders spoke with the rancher, thanking him and offering him safe passage and friendship. Their words carried weight deeper than gold. He felt a belonging he had not known since before loss. As plans formed for the girl to return home, she felt a tightness rise again. She whispered, "It is torn, please take it off," not in pain, but in farewell. The rancher understood that healing also meant letting go. They spent their last evening by a small fire outside town, sharing stories. The girl laughed freely, now her voice light. The rancher smiled, realizing that sound was the true measure of hope. When dawn came, the escort prepared to leave. The girl mounted her horse and looked back at the rancher. Her eyes held gratitude, strength, and a future no longer stolen. She touched her heart and then pointed toward him, a promise not forgotten. The rancher watched until dusk swallowed the riders. He felt the ache of parting, but not the emptiness he once feared. Purpose stayed with him like the woven band on his wrist. He returned to his ranch days later and found it changed not in shape, but in meaning. The land felt alive again. He rebuilt fences and tended soil with renewed spirit. At night, he looked at the stars and thought of the girl riding strong toward her people. He knew their paths had crossed to heal what was torn in both of them. The story did not end with rescue or revenge, but with growth, courage, and the quiet power of choosing to stand when standing matters most. The plains held their secrets and carried them forward stitched together by one moment of mercy and bravery that changed everything. Seasons turned quietly after her departure, and the land settled into a deeper rhythm. The rancher worked from dawn to dusk, repairing what time and neglect had taken. He spoke less of silence now, because it no longer answered with emptiness. It answered with memory and meaning. The woven band stayed on his wrist, worn by sun and labor each time he looked at it. He remembered the moment he chose courage over fear and connection over isolation. The land seemed to respond. Grass grew stronger, water ran clearer, and the nights felt less cold. Far away, the girl returned to her people, welcomed with song and tears. She told her story not as one of weakness, but of survival and alliance. She spoke of a man who stood when standing was dangerous, and whose kindness cut deeper than any blade. Her people listened and honored that bond. She trained again with renewed purpose, teaching younger ones not only how to fight, but how to endure. She told them that being torn does not mean being broken, and that asking for help can be an act of strength. Months later, riders approached the ranch not with threats, but with greetings. Among them was a messenger carrying news. The girl had become a bridge between paths, encouraging peace and trade where there had been only fear. She sent her thanks and a promise that their crossing had changed many lives. The rancher read the message slowly, feeling pride, not ownership. He understood now that helping someone does not bind them to you. It frees both of you to grow. That night, he sat by the fire and whispered at his torn, "Please take it off," and smiled, because the words no longer carried pain. They carried memory of healing. The land stretched wide and open under the stars, and two lives moved forward stronger because they had once met in the hardest moment. This was the end of their shared journey, but not the end of the story. The West remembered those who chose mercy over cruelty and courage over silence, and it carried that lesson forward on the wind.